Hi, everyone. It's good to see so many people joining the call, so many people interested in election observation in Colorado and beyond. Welcome to this presentation by the Alliance for Competitive Elections on the importance of and our experience with election observation in Colorado and beyond Colorado. My name is Harrison Weinberg. I'm the Director of Party Programming and Development at ACE. I'm joined by ACE's founding director, Clayton King. Thank you all again so much for being here. Today, we're going to be talking through our experience with our joint election observation mission that we completed with the Colorado League of Women Voters, who were generous enough to donate their time as volunteers over the course of our observation mission. And we also want to talk a bit about why we believe that all parties, all movements, and anyone who goes to the polls to cast a vote should support impartial election observation, and how we can engage a broad coalition of nonpartisan organizations and individuals to ensure that our elections are free, fair, and competitive. We'll talk a bit about what election observation really entails, what it does not entail, what it is not, and how you can get involved with election observation through ACE or otherwise in the upcoming midterms. Really briefly, I want to just give a quick intro if you haven't heard of the Alliance of Competitive Elections or this is your first touch point with us. All of us started in the international democracy space. We worked with political parties abroad and government institutions, really ensuring that those political parties were responsive to voters, that they were able to conduct and analyze their own survey research to understand the issues that really matter to folks. We worked all around the world with this, really helping organizations understand issues beyond, say, ethno-nationalism and the fiery points of politics in the countries that we were working with, and really get to the issues. When all of that kind of came to an end, the foreign aid apparatus shrunk dramatically, as we all know. We had the idea to see whether or not this type of work, this type of multi-party democracy support had legs in the United States. And so what we do is really threefold. First, we are coalition builders. In Colorado alone, there are 8 registered minor parties, and we bring them together to talk about legislative reforms surrounding things like ranked choice voting and proportional representation, and generally just bringing the understanding that against the two major party apparatuses, there's slim chances of greater electoral success if we do not combine our efforts to give voters greater choice. The second thing is we run workshops and trainings to teach folks at the grassroots level and in parties like these 8 minor parties in Colorado how to run campaigns, how to communicate, how to message, how to fundraise, and create good field operations for better electoral success and more competition in the system. And the third thing, the reason that we're all here is the election observation piece, because we believe that while those first 2 buckets are great, there's little we can achieve if our elections are not ensured to be free, fair, and competitive. So with that, I will turn it over to Clayton to talk a little bit more about our primary and what we experienced during the primary and our election observation.
All right. Thank you so much, Harrison, for that introduction. Really appreciate it. I'm going to dive into some report analysis here. I'll be sharing my screen shortly. So let's save any questions towards the end of the presentation, just so that we can get through the conversation and have some time for discussion at the end here. So I will do the classic saying of I am sharing my screen. Can you see it?
We got it.
All right. Again, thank you everyone for being here for this presentation. We're really excited to share about our findings for this primary election observation mission that we conducted in Colorado for the June 30th primary. This mission is a pilot study for us where we can really understand the impact and possibilities that election observations can have in Colorado and across the United States to help preserve and protect our free and fair elections in the United States. And so while this is just a pilot, it really does demonstrate opportunities for observing in the upcoming midterm and beyond. So a little about the methodology for what we did. We conducted this election observation mission in partnership with the League of Women Voters of Colorado. We spoke directly with the Colorado Secretary of State's office to ensure accreditation for visiting the locations that we did and work directly to make sure we're in compliance across the board. Everything that we do, it does come from that international background. And so we're informed by the Declaration of Global Principles for Nonpartisan Election Observation. There are organizations across the entire world that do domestic election observation. There are actually core groups that are built regionally to support and build up domestic observation missions in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, across the world, except for North America, which we'd like to help change. And so this is part of that effort to bring international programming back to home and build nonpartisan election observation domestically here in the United States. So what did we actually do on the ground? We deployed 7 nonpartisan election observers across 3 different counties, Denver, Adams, and Sheffield County, to see 30 different locations across the election system. So in Colorado, it's not just in-person voting. There's a lot of different apparatuses happening. So we visited the voter service and polling centers where the majority of human interaction occurs. We also observed drop boxes, which is where the majority of voting occurs in Colorado. And then we observed the ballot processing centers as well, which are more secure sites where it's mostly staff, observers, party watchers that are making sure that the process is moving smoothly and also just counting and calibrating everything properly. So that's kind of some framing of what election observation looked like during this time. What were we actually watching when we were out there? We were focused really on any potential risks, any issues, and then operational concerns as well. So what did security presence look like? Was law enforcement present? Was private security present? Things like that. Of course, clear challenges like, did we see any voter intimidation? Did we see harassment, coercion, things along those lines? Were there disruptions, right? And this doesn't have to be intimidation style disruptions. This could be something as simple as the internet goes down, right? We want to track these things and ensure if issues happen, is there a way to resolve them quickly across the board? And then part of what we're watching is the other people as well. So one thing I like to say is when we are being observers, we are not only observing, but we are being observed. And that goes across the board for election watchers as well. So we saw how many election watchers were present in the different locations, watched their behavior, saw whether they, in general, from our observation, knew what the role entailed, things like that. And then, of course, any official violations or irregularities that were filed and would require any follow-up. Overall, we were very impressed, I'll say. We in general observed a calm, orderly, and professionally managed system. We had great interactions with staff. The election judges that we met with were very professional, very helpful, and especially, we as observers, we have a lot of questions, and they were very helpful to answer the questions for observers, especially as a first-time observers as well. Some of the folks that we had in there, they were very helpful and welcoming for that, which is really important for an observation mission. Voting in general was very accessible. Weren't any issues really with the signage. Accessible equipment was available. Multiple accounts where folks saw individuals using the accessible equipment successfully. The staff was very helpful in explaining how to use that equipment. And when there were any issues with language barriers, in general, there was support available for individuals who needed some support in communication. Operation locations were very secure as well, including not only the ballot uh, polling stations, but the drop boxes as well. And again, no major disruptions were observed. No intimidation, no cases of electioneering were observed as well. So overall, very positive environment. There were a few areas that could be strengthened. Of course, no election is perfect, and the point of observation is to help make the next election even better. So there were a few minor problems for sure that we'd like to share with folks today, so we can help improve these in the long run. The first is primary ballot access. In Colorado, especially, you have a system where majority of voters actually vote by mail, and unaffiliated voters, they're mailed ballots for the two major parties, the Democrats and Republican Party, and they, in this current system, did not automatically receive the primary ballots for all electoral races where they were eligible to participate in. And we generally see that as an issue because unaffiliated, by definition, means they're not affiliated with any party. And so by having only some parties have their ballots being mailed to all of the unaffiliated voters, it creates a structural barrier for voters to participate in a way that's equal across the board for all parties. So we wanted to highlight that as an issue. We did also see some challenges of voter understanding within the polling centers as well. There were a lot of cases where individuals came in and they were unaware of their party affiliation, and there was some frustration we saw among voters. Again, this was a pretty low number, but still worth mentioning, and that folks in general weren't aware that if they were registered with a party before, they had to change their voter registration 22 days ahead of the election to participate in a different primary. However, if they were registered unaffiliated, they could participate in any. And so this was more so a challenge of ensuring that people were communicated with in advance so that they're aware of which elections they're eligible to participate in, based on their party registration. And then the third issue that we had was about observer credentialing. And this is mostly because the idea of observation, even in states like Colorado, is still very, very new, right? The majority of what people consider quote unquote observers are actually election watchers that are part of a political party, part of a campaign, or part of a ballot measure committee. And so they are most of the time going in with a perspective of focusing on making sure their campaign is being dealt with properly, right? And so for observers, we're coming in from a nonpartisan perspective, and so that is very new for polling staff. And so we had some challenges, I'll say, around multi-county polling centers, just due to the fact that counties have specific credentialing laws and very specific things in different counties. Like some counties require different colored lanyards or color coordinating that doesn't happen in every county. And so we did have some issues in county specific credentialing kind of being challenging for a across the board state level observation. And then generally, that kind of definition I just described between what's a nonpartisan observer and what's an election watcher that is appointed by a party or by a ballot measure committee. There was some confusion generally about the definition between those two, and also what they are and are not allowed to do in polling centers. So those are the three kind of challenges that we saw across the board. Harrison, anything else you'd like to add at this point? Harrison was on the ground with us observing through the election and was able to see all types of locations.
The only thing I would add is that one, as you said, Clayton, we were very impressed with the level of knowledge of the election judges and the complexity of the process and the organization of that process. Personally, it made me feel very comfortable, generally seeing how much redundancy in the system there is for vote counting. and confirming of votes. And when there are issues, we actually saw them being cured immediately within the polling locations. As far as the credentialing goes, that was one kind of puzzling piece of this whole thing, where, as Clayton said, when we approached the BSPCs, we were treated slightly differently by every election judge. Everyone knew the different designations, but not exactly in which category we fell. And also the actual checking of the credentials once we were there, we went to 3 or 4 BSPCs on election day on Tuesday, and we were only asked for identification, our own personal driver's licenses from one of the election judges. So I did just want to mention that there was a bit of inconsistency there, but overall, a very impressive operation.
And Harrison brings up an interesting point where, as observers and wanting to ensure that these processes are secure, we would love to make sure, as observers, folks know we're in the right place and that we're supposed to be in there. So that actually doesn't make our job harder. It actually improves our ability to do our job. Okay, we have some recommendations we'd like to share for election administrators, for Colorado General Assembly, and for parties, as well as civil society as a whole, that we can implement starting now to start helping improve our electoral processes for the midterm and then moving forward as well. So a lot of these are going to be pretty straightforward based on what I just shared about some of the challenges that we did encounter during this upcoming election. So the first recommendation for election administrators is to increase the public understanding of election safeguards. There are a lot of tools in place and very protocols across the board from every single type of location in Colorado, but there's a clear opportunity for voter education to increase public understanding, to help people know that when they vote, that vote is secure. Now, this is, of course, a constant This, of course, is a constant challenge. And so it just really does take constant investment to ensure that the voter education is strong, especially in times when voter integrity is questioned. So we want to make sure that public awareness is improved. We also want to help voters ensure that they're aware of which elections they can participate in, right? So increase outreach from election administrators to voters, and whether that's a quick text system or an email or whatever system they think is best, voters, especially those who were frustrated and unaware which party they could participate in voting for, if they had been communicated with ahead of time, they may have been able to solve that problem and participate in a way that was more meaningful for them, whatever that means. And so help voters verify that registration ahead of those deadlines so that they can participate the best way they can. Another recommendation, of course, is provide unaffiliated voters equal access to all eligible primaries across the board, regardless of party, and so that unaffiliated voters can participate in a way where it's not biased towards any one party over another. And then clarify observer and watcher roles. And of course, what we're doing right now is helping build awareness for that ahead of the midterm as well. Some recommendations that we have for the Colorado General Assembly. This is a pretty blanket recommendation. It's international standard that if you have an election, it's recommended to not change major election laws within a year of that election. And we're not saying that don't ever change election laws, of course, but what we're saying is if you have this, like, for example, this upcoming midterm, right? If there's an issue that occurs, you just make sure that those changes are in place ahead of the next election, and don't implement anything too quickly, so that there's time for adjustment of any of the electoral systems, as well as some of that voter education that we spoke about a moment ago. And then recommendations for political parties as well. This was a big finding for us. And I understand that the primary is not maybe as exciting as the midterm, but the reality is we did not see that many election watchers in the places that we visited. I think across the board, we counted maybe four or five. Am I frozen? I might be. We counted maybe four or five individuals across all of the locations that we saw. And so um, we just want to encourage political parties across the spectrum to deploy election watchers to participate in any capacity that they can. And we're happy to help have that conversation and help parties understand the importance of election watchers as well as train them as opportunities arise. So that's again a big finding for us is we need more observers. Not we need observers, of course. What I mean is we need more election watchers from the parties, the candidates, and ballot measure committees across the board, so that we can have the nonpartisan and the partisan on both sides, or all of the sides, really being part of this dynamic system, right? And then the biggest recommendation is for civil society, right? We are one mission, and we plan on observing the midterm election in Colorado this fall. However, this is the type of model that could be deployed across every single state in the United States. And there's a huge opportunity right now to expand nonpartisan observation capacity. We're happy to be part of that. We're happy to chat with other organizations that are interested in expanding and supporting in this process. But the fact is, right now, regardless of your perspective, there are people that are concerned overall about election security. And nonpartisan observation is a great way to get some actual data and show what's happening on the ground to ensure that if there are problems that do arise, we can combat them. If there are falsehoods that arise that are being perpetuated, we can help dispel that as well through the data that we collect. And so expanding election observation capacity across the board is our top recommendation for civil society. And also, like I mentioned about the Secretary of State and the election administrators can support voter education, as can civil society, right? Civil society plays a huge role in supporting voter education across the board for election safeguards. And there's clear opportunities to expand this work in Colorado and beyond. And so now that we have these recommendations, now that we've gotten through this pilot primary election observation, what's next? From here, the Alliance for Competitive Elections is going to continue tracking any of the outstanding processes for the primary election, right? The election does not end the day of the election when all of the ballots are put in. It takes a long time to process and analyze and ensure that things went smoothly and that the counts are accurate and everything like that. So we'll continue tracking those. We'll also continue our analysis, focused on key areas across the board, focused on voter access, transparency, election security, abuse of administrative resources, AI in campaigns, and elections in general, right? We're going to continue that analysis heading towards the midterm. And from here, we're also going to expand our scope of observation into the midterm and increase the number of observers and geographic coverage that we have for Colorado. Our goal is to have 2 observers per county in the entirety of Colorado, and that is our goal, and that's what we plan on doing this fall. So that's essentially a quick snippet of what we've done for the midterm or for the primary and where we're going from here. So from here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to open it up for any comments or question of folks in the room.
Clayton, I want to jump in really quick with a last word as well, just in case anybody's interested about being an election observer in the upcoming midterms and wants to talk to us about what we're doing and how we're organizing it and how you can participate as a volunteer. Just kind of based on thinking about everything that Clayton just said, and in our experience observing primaries and our experience actually observing in countries abroad, what can and can't we do as observers? I think I just want to point out real quick that we're observing inconsistencies and consistencies across polling locations. We're asking questions. We're being impartial investigators, right? And we cannot interfere or disrupt in any way. But the final point that I'd make is the power in election observation is in the reporting. And I think in this age of nationalized news, nationalized politics, polarization of the electorate to the extreme, and within the information space, what election observation does, what the report does, gives us an opportunity to say, we were there, right? We, despite this crazy media environment, despite the chaos that we see in our information space, we had boots on the ground. This was a shoe leather operation. And ultimately, we can either refute or corroborate claims of fraud, malfeasance, uh, malicious intent, or intimidating behavior at the polls. And we want something to be able to point to a body of evidence that was collected in person with people who were there when confusion starts to abound post-election. So that's all I wanted to say. We can now open it up to any questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. So, I don't know if you've noticed on LinkedIn, Clayton, but I'm currently the Western Pennsylvania Campaign and Research Associate for, Make Voters the Donors, a nascent 501c4 that's nonpartisan. Um, any simultaneous involvement I have with Make Voters the Donors and the Alliance for Competitive Elections would, of course, need to be approached with intention, but I was proactive and simultaneous involvement wouldn't be a problem per se. I am wondering though, my organization for which I'm working does not have operations in Colorado, just Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and leadership in New York. However, we do have plans for national legislation in 2030 to enable anyone who wants to opt into democracy vouchers, if you're familiar with it, thus and allowing politicians to be accountable to the people, not corporations. And I know ACE has aspirations that are national as well. I am, of course, so I'm wondering, we're looking for not just input, but collaboration with other entities. This is also a conversation that can be continued on LinkedIn as well. But that is something I'm just curious about anyway.
Yeah, and I'm happy to continue this conversation afterwards as well. I think the question is regarding participate like election financing, right? And that's a great question. That because of the quick turnaround that we had for this pilot, we didn't focus on election financing necessarily in this conversation, but it is a overall topic of interest that we will plan on analyzing through the midterm as part of our observation and analysis as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hey guys, I got a quick question. Can you
Yeah,
hear me?
Tony, what's
Yep.
up? Yeah.
Hey guys, how's it going, by the way? Also, Clayton, you mentioned during the presentation that the impression you got was that most of the election judges were pretty well informed and pretty well trained and kind of seemed to know sort of left and right limits and what what they were supposed to be doing there and everything. I was wondering, did you have the opportunity to do any more kind of deeper research into how counties recruit, train, and deploy election judges themselves like that? I asked because I actually recently served as a ballot transport judge in Jefferson County for the midterm. And I'm just curious as to how other counties do that process, the recruiting and selection and everything, if you guys were able to look into that at all.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, typically they try to have bipartisan teams. We know that sometimes that's a challenge for certain counties to recruit and observe or recruit bipartisan teams. It requires your party affiliation to actually be registered as two separate organizations. And so sometimes you'll have a major party and an unaffiliated, or someone will change their ballot change their party affiliation ahead of time to make sure that they fit within that parameter. And so sometimes it's not as bipartisan as we'd like it to be. We'd like it to be multi-partisan at the end of the day, but that's a great question. I have some meetings next week to continue answering that question, but it's something we'll keep looking into for the midterm as well.
Just a quick observational note on that. We did at, I think it was one of the recreation centers, Montclair, I believe, we actually had, were lucky enough to catch the ballot collection team come through. And I know they're rigidly disciplined in making sure that there are, in our traditional understanding would be a Democrat and a Republican on that two-person team collecting the ballots. But I investigated a little further, and it can be any mix of parties. So, for example, Unity Party was also holding a primary on the 30th. They would have been eligible to have one of their folks join one of those teams with either a Republican or Democrat. I'm not sure about unaffiliated. So I know that that's something that they definitely adhere to for the ballot collection. I'm not sure, and obviously Clayton will follow up with this, but in terms of election judges and the staff who are actually there interacting with voters at the BSPC, I'm unsure of that.
I love the question though. I love both the questions we've had so far. This primary election observation is a mechanism for us to have these conversations, see what the challenges and questions are in the community, and see where we can kind of focus our attentions where people are interested. And so really appreciate those so far. And we're wondering the same thing. So I have a meeting with an election administrator next week to start answering that question. But yeah, the more questions, the better. We appreciate them. Okay. Any other questions from the audience here?
I think I've got something, Clayton, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please go ahead, Ron.
Um, how would, say, if one of these other organizations that joined, thanks for your time, everybody. It was lovely having you. If they wanted to run their own election observation mission, how would they do that? Would they get in contact with their Secretary of State or something like that?
That's a great question. So it depends on the state, but typically election observation missions are accredited through the state that you live in's Secretary of State's office. And then they'll provide accreditation and share, state-specific rules. But typically, that's the first step is get in contact with the election administrators at the state level. I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone who's interested in expanding election observation in their state or in general. So if you need specific advice or where to start, please reach out to us. We're happy to help. Okay. And with that, let's see here. Any questions in the chat worth discussing here?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What would you say was one of the learnings you've both taken from your international experience, to your domestic experience, and how do those two differ?
It's a great question. From my perspective, people in other countries are much more used to international election observers. So I've observed 3 different times in the last 2 years in different countries in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus, and across the board, they are not surprised whatsoever to see folks showing up from all over the world to walk into their polling stations and, be greeted welcomely and have a few questions, observe the process, right? It's a very welcoming experience and a really great opportunity for international just collaboration and meeting new folks around the world who are interested and care about free and fair elections across the world. And you compare that to the experience in the United States, and it's kind of striking actually, because we deploy election observers across the world every single year in multiple elections, and people in the United States don't have the pleasure of that experience. It's really a warming experience if you're in some random county in Colorado and you get a delegation of Polish election observers come in and be interested and care about election systems and want to learn from you. And it's really an opportunity for international collaboration, and the domestic side as well. Other countries that we interact with, you'll see election observation missions with over 1,000 domestic observers in their missions. And you just don't see that in the United States. So it's a huge opportunity that's being missed right now.
I yeah. Tony in the chat says the American mind cannot comprehend. There's actually, as much of a joke as that is, I was going to say there's actually so much skepticism when I did not actually when I was out on the mission itself, but telling people, oh, we're going to polling locations, or trying to explain to somebody on the street who I just sparked a conversation with, this is what we do. The instinct immediately is to like scratch under the surface and see who's funding you and who's sending you to the polls, and are you actually the ones intimidating voters, right? And so that's one thing I think. No, there is I never encountered that level of skepticism abroad. In fact, in Albania in particular, I did a municipal election observation in the capital, in the sense that I got, you actually, by the way, do not wear a credential around your neck in the United States. In most places abroad, you do, and when you walk into a voting location with that around your neck, there's the sense of like, oh, the election observers are here, let's be on our best behavior. That being said, you're also going to encounter things abroad that God, I hope you aren't going to see in the United States. And by that I mean I've seen money literally changing hands at the polling location. I think Clayton has as well. And just like I say this all the time, it's about my experience abroad with observation. Goons. There are goons. Like, I don't know how else to say it. There are like dudes in leather jackets just milling about polling locations, like, who are associated with various parties, checking the voter rolls, seeing who's voted, and then going to get that guy in that district to bring him to the polls, right? So like these are things I hope never come to the United States. So we are looking at a bit of a different situation, although the methods are almost entirely congruent for our observation.
There's one of those badges
There's
that Harrison was talking about. Yeah, and I love getting it as a souvenir. I recommend having it for all domestic observation missions. It makes it more fun. It's a little souvenir, a point of pride. Okay. Give it another minute in case there's any last questions here, but we're happy to wrap up a little bit early. Right. Well, thank you everyone for joining for this presentation of the ACE's Colorado Primary Election Observation Report. We will be publishing this report shortly. I'll send an email to all the participants with the link to that report. We'll be publishing a recording of this session as well for those who weren't able to attend, so we can send that around to folks in your orbit who may be interested and weren't able to attend today. The more the merrier. And with that, I leave it in case others have questions, but just thank you everyone for being here today. We appreciate it.